The scent of turpentine was the only currency Maya truly understood. It was the smell of creation, of frustration, of life itself, clinging to her clothes, her hair, the very pores of her skin, like a second, more honest self. It permeated the threads of the worn denim overalls she lived in, seeped into the cracked leather of her boots, and even clung to the faint, lingering aroma of stale coffee that perpetually hung in the air around her. This wasn't a mere odor, it was an identity, a testament to countless hours hunched over canvases, chasing an elusive truth with the tip of a brush. It was the signature of her existence, as indelible as the paint stains beneath her fingernails. Her studio, a cramped fourth-floor walk-up in a part of Brooklyn that gentrification had forgotten to grace, was a chaotic cathedral of her own making. The building itself was a relic, a stoic brownstone whose brick facade showed the wear of a century of New York winters. Inside, the stairwell spiraled upwards, each step creaking a protest underfoot, smelling faintly of ancient dust and forgotten dreams. Maya knew every chipped banister, every faded swatch of wallpaper that peeled reluctantly from the walls. Her studio door, a heavy, solid slab of wood, had long since lost its original paint, revealing layers of pale blue, then a muted green, then a stark white beneath. It was a canvas of neglect, mirroring the economic strata she inhabited. Inside, canvases in various states of completion leaned against every wall, their silent faces a testament to her relentless, often desperate pursuit of a truth she could only express in color and texture. Some were still pristine, daunting white expanses waiting for the first hesitant stroke. Others bore the ghosts of abandoned ideas, faint outlines of figures or landscapes quickly painted over in a burst of frustration, only to be resurrected and covered again. There was one, a sprawling piece depicting a city skyline dissolving into abstract chaos, which she had been working on for months, adding a new layer of despair with each passing week. Another, smaller one, half-finished, showed a single gnarled tree reaching skeletal branches towards a bruised sky, a self-portrait of her own resilience. Her current obsession, a massive 6-by-8-foot canvas that dominated the small space, was a swirling vortex of deep indigos, violent violets, and desperate, frantic strokes of white that clawed their way out of the darkness. It was a leviathan in the room, demanding all attention, sucking the light from the already dim corners. She had started it weeks ago, fueled by a sleepless night and a profound sense of nameless longing. It was about yearning, a raw, formless hunger for something she couldn't name, something just beyond reach, like a half-remembered melody or a fleeting shadow at the edge of vision. It was the story of her life, painted in acrylics, because oil was a luxury she couldn't afford. The cheap acrylics dried too fast, cracked under pressure, and didn't blend with the buttery forgiveness of oils. They demanded speed, decisiveness, an almost brutal attack on the canvas. There was no gentle building of layers, no subtle intermingling of hues. It felt like another metaphor for her life, a constant, hurried rush against time before everything hardened into an unworkable state. The colors would set, unyielding, before she could truly coax them into the nuanced gradations she craved, leaving harsh lines and abrupt transitions. It was a constant battle, a negotiation with inadequate tools, reflecting the larger battle. She fought daily. A layer of dust coated everything, a fine grey powder that settled on her few pieces of mismatched furniture, a lopsided armchair salvaged from a street corner, a small, paint-splattered wooden table, and a rickety metal shelving unit overflowing with tubes of paint, brushes, and discarded rags. It mocked her inability to afford even the luxury of cleanliness, a constant visual reminder of her circumstances. The air itself felt thick with it, tasting faintly metallic. The radiator in the corner had been silent for a week, a metallic corpse against the encroaching chill of the October evening. Its cast-iron surface was pitted and rusty, a testament to decades of indifferent landlords. Each night, the cold seeped further into the building's ancient bones, settling in the studio like an unwelcome guest. She had taken to wearing layers of threadbare sweaters, even indoors, huddling over a mug of lukewarm tea, her fingers stiff and aching. Sleep was a restless dance with shivers, a constant readjustment of the thin blanket she owned. An eviction notice was tucked into the frame of her door, its stark red letters a daily, screaming reminder of her precarious existence. It had been there for 3 days, a beacon of impending doom, its crimson ink a cruel mimicry of the vibrant reds she so rarely allowed herself to buy. The date on it was imminent, a countdown to homelessness, a final, inescapable deadline. This was her reality, a world rich in passion and devastatingly poor in everything else. Her central wound wasn't the poverty itself, though the constant gnawing anxiety it produced was a physical presence in her gut, a tightening knot that never truly loosened. It was the insidious belief that her financial state rendered her, and by extension her art, invisible. She poured her soul onto these canvases, bled her emotions into every brushstroke, yet they remained unseen, unheard, speaking a language the world seemed unwilling or unable to learn. It was a profound isolation, a silent scream into the void. Galleries sent polite form-letter rejections, standardized paragraphs of regret that felt colder than any direct insult. While we appreciate your unique vision, unfortunately, your work does not align with our current focus. The words blurred into a monotonous litany of polite dismissal, each one a tiny pinprick against her already bruised ego. Potential buyers, the few who found their way to her online portfolio, a hastily built website she managed herself, relying on free templates and blurry phone photos of her work, balked at prices that wouldn't even cover a month's rent. They saw the art, perhaps, but they didn't see the soul, the struggle, the sheer cost of creation. They saw a price tag, and it was too high for an unknown. The shrill ring of her phone sliced through the quiet concentration, making her jump. The cheap flip phone, a relic she had somehow managed to keep functioning, vibrated violently against the edge of her table. It was a jarring intrusion into the sacred silence of her creative space. Wiping a streak of cobalt blue from her cheek with the back of her hand, leaving a faint smear, she answered, propping the phone between her shoulder and ear as she squinted at the canvas. "Chloe, Maya, thank God, you have to save me. I mean, literally, you have to become me." Chloe Dubois' voice was a torrent of panicked, high-end anxiety, a perfectly modulated crescendo of stress that could only come from someone whose problems were, by most standards, entirely self-inflicted. It was the sound of a perfectly curated life hitting a minor snag that to her felt like a planetary apocalypse. Chloe, Maya's only link to that glittering distant world, was an old art school acquaintance. They had been roommates for a chaotic year, a friendship born of proximity and a shared, if vastly different, passion for art. Chloe, of course, had abandoned her own artistic aspirations years ago, seduced by the siren song of social climbing, and inherited wealth. Now she managed a sprawling empire of vague lifestyle ventures and charity galas, her life a dizzying carousel of designer clothes, exclusive parties, and an endless quest for social relevance. Maya sighed, dabbing a worn-out brush into a smear of titanium white. The brush was shedding bristles, its wooden handle smooth and worn from years of use, a loyal companion through countless artistic battles. "What did you do now? Double book your shaman and your colorist?" Maya asked, the dry sarcasm a familiar defense mechanism. She knew Chloe's crises were always of the first-world variety, utterly foreign to Maya's daily struggle for survival. Worse, infinitely worse. "You know the fundraiser in Paris? The one for the endangered Cézanne paintings? Or whatever?" The Art for the Ages Gala. I'm the chair. I have to be on a plane in 3 hours. My private jet is literally fueled and waiting. It's a whole thing. Press is waiting. Benefactors are flying in from around the globe. But I completely forgot. Tonight is the night. Chloe's voice escalated, thin and reedy with genuine panic. What night? Maya asked, her attention still on the canvas. On the way, the desperate white struggled against the oppressive dark, a tiny flicker of defiance in a vast, encroaching void. Her mind was half in the painting, half listening to the frantic torrent of words from Chloe. The Julian Croft night. I promised him a small, intimate gathering at the penthouse. A welcome to the building thing. He's my new neighbor, Maya. He moved into the penthouse directly above mine. You can't just cancel on Julian Croft. He's a myth, a ghost. People say he hasn't been to a social event in 5 years. This is a coup, Maya, a major social coup, and I'm about to blow it. My reputation will be ruined. Chloe's words were clipped, frantic, each one a desperate plea for salvation. The name registered, a distant echo from a world of headlines and financial news she never read. Julian Croft, the tech billionaire. The name was synonymous with innovation, with unfathomable wealth, with an almost mythical reclusiveness. A prodigy who had built a digital empire named Nexus from his dorm room, a platform that had revolutionized social media, ironically, by making billions of people feel more connected, while its creator became increasingly isolated. Then at the height of his success, he had retreated from the world, becoming a figure of intense speculation and mystery. A modern-day Howard Hughes, they called him, a man of immense power who preferred shadows to spotlights. Maya had seen his face occasionally on the front page of newspapers or splashed across business magazines she leafed through in laundromats. A stark, intense gaze, a sharp jawline, and an almost unsettling stillness. So reschedule, Maya said, stating the obvious solution for a world that wasn't Chloe's, a world where unforeseen circumstances were met with practical adjustments, not existential dread. You don't reschedule a ghost, Maya. He'll vanish. He'll think I'm a flake and never speak to me again, and his penthouse has the adjoining terrace, Maya, the one I want to buy. The whole thing is strategic. It's the crown jewel of the building, and it would double the value of my current unit. Please, Maya, you have to do this for me. The desperation in Chloe's voice sharpened, becoming almost shrill, a desperate plea for help that transcended mere social anxiety and touched upon something more primal. The fear of losing a tangible asset. The catering is ordered. The guest list is tiny, exclusive. They don't really know me, just my name. It's mostly his business associates, people who are just as socially awkward as he is, probably. You look exactly like me. Same height, same hair. You just need to, put on the armor. No one will ever know. It's just for a few hours. Maya stopped painting. The brush hovered over the canvas, a single droplet of white paint quivering on its tip. She looked around her studio, at the peeling paint, on the walls, at the stack of unpaid bills on her small table, at the damning red of the eviction notice that seemed to glow malevolently in the dim light. The cold was beginning to seep into her bones, making her shiver involuntarily. The silence of the dying radiator was a mockery. Chloe, that's insane. I can't pretend to be you. I don't know your friends. I don't know anything about your life. What if someone asks me something specific? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I stumble? You don't have to. Just smile, nod, and make sure their glasses are full. Circulate. Be charming. Ask them about their lives. People love that. It's 2, maybe 3 hours, tops. The caterers will handle everything else. And Maya... Chloe's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, dangerously persuasive, a low, seductive hum that bypassed Maya's logical mind and burrowed directly into her deepest anxieties. I'll pay you. $10,000. The brush slipped from Maya's fingers, clattering to the paint-splattered floor with a faint, hollow sound that echoed the sudden emptiness in her gut. $10,000. The number was so absurd, so astronomical in her current context, that it didn't even sound real. It was a lifeline. It was rent for a year. It was a new radiator, finally. It was paint, canvases, brushes, time. It was the difference between survival and utter surrender, between continuing this desperate struggle and having a brief, glorious reprieve. It was enough to quiet the gnawing anxiety in her stomach, to make the red notice on her door disappear, at least for a while. But the price was her integrity. It was a lie, a fundamental betrayal of her own quiet, authentic world, the only thing she truly possessed. Her art was born from truth, from a raw, unvarnished expression of her soul. To become Chloe, even for a few hours, felt like a desecration of that very principle. "No," Maya said, her voice weaker than she intended, a thin whisper against the booming presence of the number. "I can't. It's not right." It was her usual defense, her moral compass trying to steady the ship in a storm, pointing towards the familiar North Star of her artistic integrity. "Right?" Chloe scoffed, a brittle, dismissive sound that was almost a sneer. "Is it right that you're freezing in that studio while your talent goes completely unnoticed? Is it right that you have to choose between eating and buying paint? Is it right that you're about to be on the street, Maya? This isn't about right or wrong. It's about survival. Consider it a performance piece, an exploration of identity in a capitalistic society. Call it whatever you want. Just do it. Please, Maya. For me, for us. The key is with my doorman, Jacques. The dress is on the bed, the shoes are next to it, everything is arranged. Just be me. For a few hours. No one will know." The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening, more oppressive than the earlier quiet. Maya stood in the ringing silence, the offer hanging in the air, thick and heavy, like the smell of oil paint she missed so much, a tantalizing vapor against the acrid turpentine. $10,000. The number pulsed behind her eyes, a neon sign in the gloom of her studio, illuminating the dark corners of her desperation. It was a devil's bargain, a temptation that spoke directly to her deepest, most primal fears of failure and destitution, of vanishing into the anonymous grey of poverty. She looked at her painting, at the raw, desperate hunger she had captured. In swirling indigo and stark white, what was it yearning for? To be seen, to be acknowledged. And here was a chance, however twisted, to step onto a stage, to be seen by the world, even if it was through another woman's eyes, wearing another woman's skin. The irony was a bitter pill, so sharp it made her gag. She thought of the cold, of the red letters on the notice, of the gnawing, endless worry that was her constant companion. She imagined the brief, glorious freedom that money could buy, the canvases she could fill, the warmth she could feel. With a shudder that was part fear and part resignation, a reluctant surrender to the impossible choice, she began to strip off her paint-stained clothes. The transformation was an act of violence against her own identity. It wasn't just a change of clothes, it was an erasure, a calculated demolition of Maya and the painstaking construction of Chloe. Maya stood in the cavernous, marble-clad bathroom of Chloe's penthouse, a stranger staring back at her from a mirror framed in gold leaf. The room was a shrine to expensive sterility, pristine white marble floors, a freestanding clawfoot tub that looked like it belonged in a museum, and polished chrome fixtures that gleamed under the recessed lighting. The air was thick with the cloying scent of high-end perfume, utterly alien to the turpentine and stale coffee that was her natural habitat. Chloe's armor was a slip of a dress the color of liquid mercury, a designer creation that probably cost More than Maya's entire art school education, including the cheap acrylics. It was cut to cling, to shimmer, to announce its presence. It felt alien against her skin, too smooth, too cold, a second skin of falsehood that seemed to constrict her breath. The fabric itself felt alive, rippling with every subtle movement, reflecting the harsh light of the bathroom in 1,000 tiny, mocking flashes. She slid her feet into impossibly high, impossibly delicate stilettos, each click on the marble floor a definitive step away from herself. She had spent an hour studying Chloe's online presence on her tiny flip phone, a digital ghost of a life. Lived in sponsored posts and hashtagged moments, every Instagram reel, every perfectly angled selfie, every curated travelogue contributed to the persona. Maya absorbed it all. The slightly lifted chin, the practiced easy smile that never quite reached her eyes, the languid drape of a hand, the precise angle at which she held a champagne flute. She mimicked the slight, dismissive tilt of Chloe's head, the almost imperceptible shrug that implied effortless superiority. She applied makeup with the precision of a forger, erasing her own tired lines and replacing them with a luminous, artificial glow, sculpting a new face with contours of expensive powder and blush. Her eyes, usually shadowed by the intense gaze of an artist, were now framed by perfectly sculpted brows and long, artificial lashes. Her lips, usually pale and unadorned, were painted a vibrant, glossy red. Each stroke felt like a betrayal, a further blurring of the line between who she was and who she was pretending to be. The persona of Chloe was a complex character, a mentor and an antagonist in one. It was a shield that promised protection from the harsh realities of her own life, a temporary reprieve from poverty and invisibility. But it was also a cage, constraining her movements, her words, her very thoughts. Every instinct Maya had, every spontaneous reaction, had to be filtered through the fabricated persona. It was exhausting, a constant mental performance. Stepping out of the bathroom and into the sprawling living area was the point of no return. The space was a monument to wealth, a sterile landscape of white leather, chrome and glass that seemed to absorb all sound and warmth. It was pristine, immaculate, almost aggressively so. White sofas stretched for what seemed like miles, their surfaces untouched by any human imprint. Gleaming chrome tables held only artfully arranged sculptures that seemed to have no purpose, other than to be looked at. The silence in the penthouse was unsettling, a vast echoing emptiness despite its immense size. There was no comfortable clutter, no personal touches, no warmth. Not a single object in the room looked like it had ever been truly touched or loved or even lived with. It was a curated space, designed for display, for impressing, not for living. Wall of windows offered a breathtaking, almost aggressive panorama of the Manhattan skyline, the city lights a glittering carpet thrown at her feet. The bridges stretched like jeweled necklaces across the dark expanse of the rivers. The skyscrapers, illuminated from within, seemed to pierce the night sky, their distant gleam a powerful reminder of the world she was now attempting to infiltrate. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it had no soul. It was a postcard view, a triumph of urban engineering, but it lacked the messy, vibrant life of her own street-level Brooklyn. The final threshold was the elevator ride down to the lobby. "Just going to greet my guests," she'd mumbled to the head caterer, a stern-faced woman in a crisp white uniform who seemed to judge Maya's every breath. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in her chest, beating, a desperate rhythm against the false calm of her exterior. The elevator descended with silent, swift precision, a glass and steel coffin carrying her towards her manufactured fate. In the lobby, the doorman, a man with a regal posture and kind, eyes named Jacques, smiled warmly. He was older, his uniform impeccably pressed, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew Chloe, really knew her, and that knowledge was a fresh wave of panic. "Good evening, Miss Dubois," Jacques said, his voice a smooth, polite rumble. The name hit her, a physical jolt like a tiny electric shock. Miss Dubois, this was it. The moment to retreat, to confess this was a ridiculous mistake, to tear off the mercury dress and run back to the comforting grit of her studio. But the words caught in her throat, a tight knot of fear and desperation. She simply nodded, the gesture feeling clumsy and foreign, utterly unlike Chloe's effortless grace. "Good evening, Jacques." The lie was sealed. She had crossed over, leaving Maya the artist in her cold, dusty studio, and becoming Chloe the socialite, hostess to a billionaire. Guests began to arrive in a quiet trickle, a steady stream of elegance. They were polished, impossibly chic men and women, their clothes exuding an air of understated expense, their laughter tinkling like crystal. They spoke in a shorthand of shared experiences she couldn't decipher, mentions of St. Bart's, of Aspen, of deals closed on golf courses she'd only seen in movies. Their conversations drifted between obscure art auctions and philanthropic endeavors, between the latest luxury real estate ventures and whispered rumors about other members of their elite circle. Maya felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, a terrifying sense of falling into a world where she didn't belong. She was an imposter, a fraud, and every polite smile, every air kiss, every casual gesture felt like a step closer to discovery, to the inevitable unmasking. She kept her answers vague, her hands busy with a champagne flute, using the delicate glass as a prop, a shield. She gestured with it, sipped from it, held it in front of her face as she pretended to listen intently. Her primary enemy was the constant screaming fear of being found out, a cold knot in her stomach that tightened. With every passing minute, it was a physical manifestation of the anxiety that had been her constant companion for so long, now magnified 1,000-fold. A woman with a severe haircut and a dress made of what looked like architectural blueprints, a stark, geometric pattern that seemed to defy the very concept of fabric, cornered her near the panoramic windows. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, seemed to pierce through Maya's carefully constructed facade. "Chloe, darling, I adored your last post from the Hamptons. That little bistro to die for. We must go when you get back." "Ah, yes. We must," Maya managed, her mind racing, scrambling for a memory that didn't exist. What post? What bistro? She smiled, a little too widely, hoping it conveyed enthusiasm. "And is it true what I hear about you and Jean-Pierre?" The woman pressed, her eyes gleaming with a thirst for gossip, leaning in conspiratorially. "Jean-Pierre?" Maya repeated, her mind a complete blank. The name echoed in the hollow cavern of her ignorance. "Don't be coy, the polo player, are you or aren't you?" "Oh, him," Maya said, forcing a light laugh, a brittle sound that felt entirely foreign. "It's all just talk. You know how it is. People always speculate." She escaped under the guise of greeting a new arrival, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was a minefield. Every interaction was a potential explosion, every question a trapdoor. She felt like an actress performing a role for which she had no script, simply improvising wildly and praying she didn't expose herself. Then he arrived. There was no grand entrance. The ambient chatter didn't hush. The polished guests didn't turn in unison. Julian Croft simply appeared at the doorway, a quiet void in the glittering tableau. He was not what she'd expected. The tabloids depicted him as a ruthless shark, a cold genius, a man forged from silicon and steel. But the man standing there seemed tired, deeply, profoundly tired, as if the weight of his empire had settled permanently on his shoulders. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, no tie. The fabric was expensive, but unostentatious. His dark hair was a little unruly, as if he had run his hands through it countless times, and his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of grey, held a profound weariness, an old soul's exhaustion. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, and found little joy in it. He surveyed the room with a look of detached resignation, as if it were a landscape he was forced to traverse, but in which he held no interest. A social obligation he endured rather than enjoyed. He seemed as out of place at his own welcome party as she felt, a solitary island in a sea of superficiality. In that instant, Maya felt an unexpected and dangerous flicker of kinship. His alienation was a mirror to her own. He was the only person in the room who looked as uncomfortable, as profoundly out of place as she felt. It was a shared secret, a silent acknowledgement across a crowded room. He caught her staring, and, for a moment, the polite mask of Chloe slipped. Her genuine empathy, her artistic eye, momentarily stripped away the fabricated persona. He walked directly toward her, his path cutting through the other guests as if they were mere apparitions, their brightly colored dresses and sharp suits blurring into an indistinct backdrop. He moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze fixed solely on her. "Miss Dubois," he said, his voice low, smoother than she'd anticipated, a rich baritone that resonated softly in the vast space. "Thank you for this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the glittering spectacle of his forced welcome party, a hint of irony playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Croft," she replied, her own voice sounding breathy, foreign, too high-pitched for her liking. "Welcome to the building. We're thrilled to have you." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, dry and bitter. The word "we" felt particularly false, as if she were somehow complicit in this elaborate charade. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of quiet amusement. "Please, Julian." His grey eyes held hers, and they weren't cold as the legend suggested. They were intensely observant, analytical, as if he were scanning her code, looking for flaws in her programming, for the underlying algorithm of her being. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her life. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, and the fear of exposure clashed violently with a strange, burgeoning sense of recognition. The party swirled around them, a meaningless ballet of social obligation, a cacophony of polite laughter and clinking glasses. But Maya and Julian remained locked in a strange, silent orbit, a gravitational pull drawing them closer. He didn't mingle. He stayed near her, nursing a single glass of whiskey, the amber liquid glinting in the soft light. He was a quiet sentinel in the sea of noise, his presence a still point in a turning world. The small talk was excruciating. For Maya, she fumbled through conversations about art auctions she hadn't attended, charity galas she knew nothing about, and obscure European vineyards, topics gleaned from Chloe's frantic last-minute briefing on the phone, a chaotic scramble of half-heard details. She felt like an echo, a hollow copy of a life she couldn't inhabit. Then, a moment of reprieve. They found themselves standing by a smaller, abstract painting on a side wall, a chaotic splash of red and gold that Chloe had likely bought because it matched a throw pillow, a piece of decorative art devoid of any deeper meaning. It was aggressively, vibrant, almost offensively bright, screaming for attention without saying anything. "What do you think of that one?" Julian asked, his question genuine, cutting through the performative chatter and superficiality that filled the room. His gaze was fixed on the painting, but his tone suggested a deeper inquiry, and Maya, for one fatal moment, forgot she was Chloe. Chloe, who would have called it divine, or a brilliant investment, or perhaps the perfect splash of color for this space. Chloe, who would have offered a vacuous compliment that meant nothing. Maya, the artist, looked at it and saw nothing but its superficiality. Her artistic integrity, the very core of her being, rebelled against the pretense. "I think it's hollow," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, a raw, unfiltered truth escaping the confines of her carefully constructed lie. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it was her own voice, stripped of Chloe's affectations. "It's technically proficient, I suppose. The colors are balanced. The composition is fine, but there's no feeling. It's loud, but it isn't saying anything. It's just decoration. It's a trick of the eye, not a movement of the soul." A profound silence fell between them, deep and absolute, swallowing the distant party chatter. Maya's blood ran cold. She had just insulted her own borrowed art collection to the guest of honor, the man she was supposed to be impressing. She had failed the test. The mask had cracked, revealing the raw, authentic face beneath. She braced for a polite dismissal, a retreat, a quiet turning away that would signify the end of the charade. Instead, Julian turned his full attention from the painting to her. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time, transforming his weary face. It was like watching the sun break through a layer of dense fog, illuminating a landscape previously shrouded in gloom. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes softened and a warmth spread across his features. "Hollow," he repeated softly, savoring the word as if it were a rare and precious delicacy. "That's the most honest thing I've heard all night. In this room, in this city, in this entire life I've built. Honesty is a rarity." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the analytical gaze had been replaced by something else. Curiosity. Fascination. He wasn't looking at Chloe Dubois, the socialite. He was looking at the woman who had just spoken the truth in a room built on polite fictions, a woman who saw the world with the same discerning, unsparing eye that he did. This was the inmost cave, an unexpected space of authenticity, and he was inviting her in. She had never felt so seen and so terrified of being discovered. The paradox was exquisite, almost unbearable. As the night deepened, the guests began to dissolve, their shimmering forms and brittle laughter evaporating into the New York night, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume, the faint echo of meaningless conversation, and the detritus of a lavish party. One by one, they offered polite goodbyes, their faces flushed with champagne, their eyes already focused on the next event, the next curated moment. Soon it was just the two of them, standing in the cathedral of glass and steel, the city lights, a silent, glittering congregation below. The pretense of the party was over, and with it Maya's script. She was adrift in a dangerous, uncharted territory, the lie still clinging to her, but fraying at the edges. The silence that settled between them wasn't awkward. It was charged, heavy with unspoken things, a thick, palpable tension. Julian walked to the vast wall of windows, his back to her, a silhouette against the endless tapestry of the metropolis he had, in many ways, conquered. He stood there for a long moment, his hands in his pockets, lost in thought. "I built an empire on the idea of connection," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to merge with the city's hum, a private confession intended only for her. Platforms. For sharing, for engagement, for community. Billions of people all talking at once, broadcasting their curated lives, their perfect moments, their filtered realities. He turned to face her, his grey eyes shadowed with a profound melancholy, a vulnerability that surprised her. "And I have never felt more disconnected in my entire life. My success is a fortress. It's designed to keep people out, and it works. It keeps the noise out, but it keeps everything else out too. It keeps me out." He gestured around the sterile, opulent room, a sweep of his hand encompassing the vast emptiness. "This is a part of it. This penthouse, these parties, the victory is empty. It's a gilded cage, and I built it myself." His confession was a stone dropped into the still pool of the evening, and the ripples washed over Maya, stripping away the last vestiges of Chloe. She saw past the billionaire, past the myth, and saw a man drowning in the same profound loneliness that fueled her own art, the same isolation that she painted onto her canvases. The chasm between her world and his suddenly vanished, replaced by a bridge of shared humanity, a common ground of profound existential solitude. It was a recognition, a deep, resonant chord struck between two souls who had until now believed themselves uniquely alone. He moved closer, slowly, deliberately, his gaze intense, searching, his eyes holding hers with an almost desperate plea. When you spoke about that painting, you weren't performing. You weren't saying what you thought I wanted to hear or what was expected. In this whole room, in this whole life of mine, that felt real. It felt like a breath of fresh air in a vacuum. He was standing so close now, she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he reached out. "Who are you?" he whispered, and the question was not an accusation, but a plea, a genuine desire to know the truth behind the polished facade. This was the ordeal, the crisis point where the lie and the truth collided with catastrophic force, a head-on collision that threatened to shatter everything. To tell him the truth was to destroy the fragile, beautiful connection they had built in the crucible of their shared vulnerability. It was to expose her deception, to admit to being a fraud, to watch the recognition in his eyes curdle into betrayal. To maintain the lie was to betray not only him, but the very authenticity he craved, the very core of herself she had, for the first time, truly revealed. Her mind screamed at her to run, to confess, to end the charade before it consumed her entirely. But her heart, starved for so long, ached with a different need. It was a deep, primal yearning to be seen, to be held, to escape the suffocating loneliness of her own life. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was electric, a jolt that seemed to bypass her skin and arc directly into her soul, igniting a spark she hadn't known was there. It was tender, intimate, a gesture that spoke of a connection far deeper than any social pretense. He saw her. He might be seeing her through the lens of Chloe's life, through the shimmering facade of the Mercury dress and the expensive makeup, but the person he was connecting with was Maya, the artist, the woman who understood what it meant to be hollow because she too had wrestled with emptiness. His head dipped slowly, deliberately, and his lips met hers. It was a kiss of absolute surrender, a death. The moral compass Maya had clung to shattered into a million pieces, its tiny shards scattering into the vast, indifferent void. The old self, the one who believed she was invisible, irrelevant, destined to struggle in obscurity, died in that moment, incinerated by the raw, undeniable fact of his attention, of his profound, undeniable connection. In its place, something new and terrifying was born, a self that was willing to live a lie for a moment of genuine feeling, a self that was willing to gamble everything for the intoxicating taste of being truly seen, even if it was under false pretenses. She kissed him back with a desperation that matched his own, a raw, frantic collision of two lonely souls reaching for an anchor in a world that had set them adrift. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about Chloe's favor or the eviction notice. It was about this man, this profound, impossible connection, and the electrifying truth of their intimacy in a room built on falsehoods. He led her from the living room, his hand in hers, their fingers intertwined, a silent, desperate grip in the face of the encroaching dawn. They walked through the silent, cavernous penthouse, past the gleaming chrome and white leather, past the perfect, untouched sculptures, and into the bedroom. Their night together was not a gentle romance. It was a storm, a feverish exploration of the vulnerability they had both kept so fiercely guarded for so long. Every touch was a question, every kiss an answer, a silent dialogue spoken in the language of skin and breath. In the darkness, stripped of the designer dress and the billionaire's suit, they were just two people searching for an anchor in a world that had offered them only superficiality. For Maya, it was a moment of absolute, terrifying presence. She was not Chloe. She was not the struggling artist. She was simply a woman, held by a man who saw past the surface, even if he didn't know the name of what he was seeing. And as she finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep in his arms, her body heavy with sensation, her mind consumed by the devastating, beautiful tragedy of it all, she knew she had stepped into a dream from which she would have to wake. The paradox of finding such genuine connection through such profound deceit was a bitter, haunting lullaby. Dawn broke over the city, casting a soft, pearlescent light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. The grey light of morning was the light of truth, unsparing and unforgiving, and it felt like an intrusion, a harsh spotlight on the intimate scene. Maya woke first, her body entangled with his, the warmth of his skin a stark contrast to the cold dread, seeping into her consciousness. His arm was draped possessively around her waist, his breath soft against her hair. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, a rhythm of peace that she had shattered with her lie. The opulence of the room, which had seemed so intimidating the night before, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in the consequences of her actions. The silk sheets, the plush carpet beneath her bare feet, the hushed silence of the vast space, it all screamed of a world that wasn't hers, a world she had only briefly entered as a thief. She looked at Julian's face. In sleep, the weariness was gone, replaced by a peacefulness that made her heart ache with a tender, agonizing pain. He looked younger, unburdened, the lines of worry smoothed away. The tenderness she felt for him was a sharp, physical pain, an agony born from the knowledge that it was all built on sand, a fleeting mirage. He was a man who valued honesty above all else, who had confessed his own profound loneliness and yearning for truth, and she had given him the most profound lie, wrapped in a stolen identity. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, suffocating her with its enormity. It was a dark, corrosive substance, eating away at the fragile beauty of the night. To stay was to face the inevitable, excruciating confession, to watch that peace on his face shatter, to see his hard-won vulnerability curdle into betrayal and disgust. It would be a cruelty she couldn't bear to inflict, a punishment she couldn't watch him endure. The thought of his eyes, those analytical grey eyes turning cold and distant, was unbearable. The only path was to disappear, to vanish as silently as she had arrived, leaving behind only a phantom presence, a lingering question mark in the lavish emptiness of his life. With the careful, silent movements of a thief, she slipped from the bed. Each rustle of the sheets seemed deafeningly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Her own paint-stained clothes were a world away, an entire lifetime removed. She couldn't put on the mercury-colored dress again. The armor felt like it would suffocate her, too heavy with the weight of her deceit. Finding a simple black cashmere robe of Chloe's, she pulled it on, its luxurious softness a final, unwelcome reminder of the falsehood. It was a final act of borrowing that felt like a desecration, a further blurring of boundaries. She looked back at the mercury dress, pooled on the floor like a shed skin, a symbol of the identity she had worn and now had to discard, leaving it behind as evidence of her temporary occupation. She left it there, an unburdened symbol of the lie she had lived. Her escape was a silent, agonizing retreat. She padded barefoot through the quiet penthouse, a ghost haunting the scene of a crime, leaving no trace but the faint, lingering scent of Chloe's perfume. The city was waking up, but Maya felt as though she were moving back into a dream, a nightmare of her own creation. She didn't take anything, not the $10,000 Chloe had promised, which felt like blood money, tainted by the betrayal. Not even a single hairpin or forgotten trinket. All she took with her was the crushing, suffocating weight of her actions and the ghost of his touch on her skin, a phantom warmth that would forever remind her of what she had gained and immediately lost. Back in her studio, the cold hit her like a physical blow, sharper and more biting than before, an immediate, brutal reassertion of her reality. Nothing had changed. Yet everything was different. The tubes of cheap acrylic paint still sat on her table, the half-finished canvas still leaned against the wall. The radiator in the corner remained a silent, metallic corpse. The eviction notice still mocked her from the doorframe, its red letters a defiant shout of doom, but its power was diminished. It was a problem of money, and money problems suddenly seemed trivial, insignificant compared to the catastrophe unfolding in her soul. The physical discomfort of the cold was nothing compared to the chill of regret and self-loathing that had settled deep within her. She stood before her canvas, the swirling vortex of indigo and white she had been working on. The yearning she had tried to capture now looked naive. A child's cry in the dark, a simplistic expression of a longing she now understood to be far more complex, far more painful. She had touched what she was yearning for. She had held it in her arms, and she had lost it through her own deceit, through the very act of pretending to be someone else. The emptiness on the canvas now seemed to mirror the emptiness in her heart. The elixir she brought back from her journey was not a lover or a fortune. It was a scar, a deep, exquisitely painful wound that had sliced her open and exposed a new layer of truth, a raw, unvarnished insight into the nature of connection, vulnerability, and the devastating cost of a lie. She had been seen, truly seen, but as someone else. It was a uniquely cruel torture, far more painful than being invisible, because she now knew what it was like to be seen, only to have that vision be a lie. She picked up a palette knife, its cold metal familiar in her grip. Her hand was steady now, free of the frantic tremor that had accompanied her earlier painting sessions. The vague, formless hunger that had guided her brush before was gone, burned away by the fires of experience. In its place was something sharp, specific, and agonizingly clear. A searing clarity had replaced the confusion. A brutal honesty had supplanted the yearning. She began to paint, not over the old image, but into it, tearing into its existing structure. She dragged black paint across the canvas, a color of profound loss, of the suffocating darkness that had enveloped her in the penthouse. She mixed a grey that held all the tenderness and melancholy of the dawn in his bedroom, a shade that captured the quiet sorrow of unspoken goodbyes. She added a violent, passionate slash of crimson, the color of a stolen kiss, of a lie, of a heartbreaking, a raw wound on the canvas itself. Her art was no longer about wanting. It was about the devastating complexity of having and losing at the same instant. It was about the price of connection and the brutal beauty of a truth found in a moment of absolute fraudulence. The favor for her friend had led to a forbidden romance, a fleeting, impossible intimacy, but that romance was a catalyst, a crucible that had burned away her old self and forged a new, devastatingly honest artistic voice. She painted through. The morning, the tears streaming down her face, mixing with the colors on the canvas, creating something true and terrible and beautiful. The raw, guttural pain of her experience poured onto the canvas, transforming the yearning into a scream, the darkness into a profound, complex shadow. She was finally visible, if only to herself, stripped bare by the fire of her own deception. The canvas became her confession, her absolution, her agonizing rebirth. She had stepped into a lie and emerged with the most painful truth.